If I were to die today, this would be my last speech. Now I know, that sounds crazy to even think about or even say. And I'm almost positive that Martin Luther King was not thinking that whenever he gave his speech, "I've been to the mountaintop." This was one of Martin Luther King's most stirring speeches that would ultimately be his last. Today, I'm going to talk to you about Martin Luther King's last speech, how it was taken, and the aftermath of the speech. "I've Been to the Mountaintop" is one of many Martin Luther King's famous speeches. On April 3rd, 1968, it was his final public speech in a very, very crowded church in Memphis, Tennessee. His main purpose was to talk about the injustice of sanitation workers in Memphis and how they are not getting paid enough and how their working conditions are very poor. In the speech, he also talked, like Brittany said, most highly of death, and not only just death in general, but his own mortality. And he talked about past stories of how he's come close to death and things that have happened to make him be at that church where he was that day. In the conclusion of his speech, his last paragraph was so impactful, not only to others, but also to himself, that Reverend Samuel Kyle is quoted in NPR books saying, "We had to help him to his seat behind that powerful prophetic speech." King had preached himself through fear of death. He knew what he was saying whenever he said that "I've been to the mountaintop." He knew what he was saying whenever he had preached himself through death. He knew what he was saying whenever he said that he had been to the mountaintop. In his last paragraph of his speech, he said, "Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop, and I don't mind. Like everybody, I would like to live a long life, but I'm not concerned about it now. I just want to do God's will, and He's allowed me to go up to the mountaintop, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." Whenever he said this, he was talking about all the horrors that he had seen on the way up to the top of the mountain, and all the black and white integration and everything that had happened, all the horrible things. But once he got to the top of the mountain, he knew that he could look back and see how far that we've come and everything that he's done to help us get where we are. But he could also look ahead and see the future and everything else that our nation had to offer. Martin Luther King was a beautiful dreamer, and his main dream was that all men be created equal. On April 4th, 1968, it's a day that changed the nation. Martin Luther King was murdered, coming out of a hotel room by a sniper. And one of the main things that is so ironic is that in his speech he said, "I'm so happy tonight, I'm not worried about anything, and I'm not fearing any man." It's almost like he knew that something might happen after he said this speech because he knew it would be such a stirring and controversial speech. In the book, Marching to the Mountaintop, it says, "Much of the violent reaction to this bloody murder could have been resolved if every city and town there would now be resolved and removed that remains injustice and racial prejudice." Although Martin Luther King was shot and murdered, his family still supported the speech that he had gave previously about the sanitation workers, and they still marched with all the sanitation workers down Memphis, Tennessee that next day. Finally, by the end of April, the city of Memphis, Tennessee made an agreement saying that they would up the pay rate of 15 cents and they would end all racial discrimination against anyone in the working business. Martin Luther King died talking about what he believed in. His name will be remembered forever, and his legacy will always live on. I've Been to the Mountaintop is one of Martin Luther King's most powerful speeches, and he is the type of person that will make you think about things beyond what you probably would have ever thought without him giving you a speech. His death was a tragedy, but thanks to him, our world and nation has become a better place.